Hi, Acadiana. Meteorologist Dave Baker here on a Wednesday. This is August the 6th. This is Let's Talk Tropics. We're going to look at several areas across the Atlantic Basin. A little bit of Dexter rather, still hanging on. In fact, Dexter might strengthen a little bit. At the same time, we'll be losing some of its tropical characteristics. So it's going to be more of a subtropical system as it moves over the North Atlantic. But the wind speeds associated with Dexter might actually increase, even though it's losing some of the tropical characteristics. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also got another area off the East Coast that has a pretty good chance for development over the next few days. And then the central and eastern part of the Atlantic look to get pretty busy. Will any of that make its way across the southern route and move into the Caribbean, which would be more of a worry for us here at home? We'll have to wait and see what happens. Nothing imminent, though, here for the next several days, so we are in good shape, at least for right now. Outside, though, here in Lafayette, at least at my house in Midtown, 90 degrees current temperature under partly cloudy skies. Feels more like 100 with a dew point 75. Relative humidity at 63%. Winds are calm, and the pressure right now at 30.18. And there are some scattered showers and thunderstorms in and around the region. We've got kind of an outflow boundary rolling across eastern Jeff Davis and southern parts of Acadia, western areas of Vermilion, and that's keeping some showers and thunderstorms going generally along and south of the LA 14 corridor there from Lake Arthur through Gueydan, Kaplan, Abbeville, and Delcambre. And some of that will start to work its way up toward Lafayette and the eastern parishes later today. So if you live east of Lake Charles, you're probably going to see a better chance for rain than what folks are going to be seeing a little bit farther toward the west. Let me go ahead and grab the Hammond radar real quick and let that load in. And we can see that we've got some action out in the offshore waters there. Let's go ahead and roll that there. And you can see that most of the action is out in the offshore waters. But down in St. Mary along the Highway 90 corridor, if you got some traveling maybe from Morgan City over to around Houma, you will run into some rain there. And there will also be more showers and thunderstorms kind of developing there right along the Gulf Coast. That's an old front that's there, and there's a bit of a low pressure area over southeastern Louisiana, but at this point in time, we're not expecting any tropical development, at least in our local waters. But it is a pretty nice day here in Lafayette, mix of sun and clouds. It is very steamy out there, though, and that's why those heat index values are pushing back over 100 degrees. The moisture's made a bigger return after a couple of drier days here for the early part of the week, and part of that was part of a big ridge of high pressure that's out over the western half of the country and the upper levels way up here. So that's kind of steering everything up to the north and then kind of down here and then out into the offshore waters like that. So that's why we had Dexter that kind of formed along this front, and that moved off away from the United States. And another little low pressure area might interact with that front that's stationary there, and we might have another tropical system. That front does extend down over the Gulf waters, though, but at this point in time, we're not expecting any issues along that front. And a little bit of an easterly wave here over the Bahamas is going to kind of work its way off toward the west. Right now, it looks like a lot of that's going to stay pretty far offshore, which would keep most of the rain associated with it as well. At this point, we're not too excited about that wave, but we'll watch it as it moves across the Gulf waters. Meanwhile, the Gulf looking pretty good. We've got those thunderstorms along the northern Gulf Coast, and then we've got some rain there over the western part of the Bay of Campeche. But other than that, it's a very quiet day across the Gulf, and the winds and seas, not really a big deal either. Most of our winds are now shifting to the south at about 5 to 10 knots, and seas running a couple of feet there. But don't forget, those winds and seas will be higher around those scattered showers and thunderstorms. So as we take a little tour of some of the webcams here along the Gulf Coast, Panama City Beach, a little bit on the gray side, but not too bad out there. Some thunderstorms off in the distance from Orange Beach. This camera is facing eastward toward Florida, so that's pretty much where the storms are right there. And then as we work our way a little farther to the west over toward Dauphin Island, you can see those thunderheads out in the Gulf waters. Those will be getting going as we go through the day. The Cocodrie cam is down, so we'll skip over and go right over to southeastern Texas near Bayou Vista. And we've got the Galveston Bay that's out there in the distance. Pretty nice day over southeastern Texas, although it is quite hot and humid out there, and those temperatures are going to be climbing back into the 90s. So let's go ahead and start with Dexter. Dexter's kind of interesting because it's been battling a lot of wind shear, especially on the northern and western side of it, but there's been some bursts of convection around the center, which is pretty unusual with the amount of shear that's there, but it does seem to be holding its own. And and it still has those tropical characteristics, but gradually over time, this is going to become what we call a cold core low pressure area. So just kind of a regular old low. It won't be creating its own energy. It'll be more dependent on the systems that are working around that. So over the next couple of days, we do expect it to continue to drift out into the central and northern part of the Atlantic Ocean. It'll be battling some colder waters as well as more wind shear, but it will probably retain its characteristics, tropical characteristics rather, through tomorrow. And then after that, the National Hurricane Center thinking it'll go subtropical and then eventually dissipate sometime over the course of the weekend. But some of the forecast models, now remember the winds with Dexter have climbed now to 50 miles per hour. They were 40 yesterday. Picked up to 45 late yesterday evening and then kind of climbed again. And even some of the forecasts here are pushing it close to hurricane strength in the next day and a half or so. And then after that, it's going to really start to lose its punch as it battles the wind shear in the colder waters. So even though it's losing the tropical characteristics, it might actually get closer to becoming hurricane strength. Not necessarily a full hurricane unless it retains those tropical characteristics. It's got that warm core, that engine in there, but if it doesn't, it still might be able to produce some hurricane force winds around that center of low pressure. So we will be saying goodbye to Dexter. Unfortunately, Dexter is not going to be an issue to any land. Out in the Atlantic, though, it is a little more busy, and we're still talking about a tropical area of moisture that's over the southeastern United States. There's kind of a low pressure area, an old front that's there, so that has a bit of a chance for some development, and a wave that came off the African coast a couple of days ago is now west of the Cape Verde Islands. Right now, it doesn't have a lot of a chance for development, but over the next couple of days, as it moves into the northern part of the Atlantic, or central Atlantic rather, it might have a little better chance. Right now, this one does appear that it's going to steer clear of Bermuda as well as the Bahamas and the east coast of the U.S. We'll watch it, but right now we're not exactly that concerned about this particular system. It's some of the other waves that are going to be out there, and we're looking ahead into next week. So remember, this is for the next 7 days from the National Hurricane Center. And then we use the Euro Tropical Formation forecast, and this is kind of putting the bets down on what could possibly develop or move in certain areas between August 11th and August the 18th. So that's this coming Monday through the following Monday. So we're kind of looking at week 2 here. And you see that the central part of the Atlantic does seem to be lit up a little bit more in that 50 to 60% range. I think that's a pretty good bet because there are a number of systems that could be working across the Atlantic. The Global Tropics Hazard Outlook, which is kind of like this one here, the 7-day forecast, but rather this goes week 2 and week 3. And you see even that is showing increased activity there over the western part of the Atlantic, a little closer to the northern Caribbean islands. Sometime starting on the 13th, which is a week from today, through 2 weeks from today, August the 19th. And of course, week 3 does tend to keep things a little more busy. And I know there's folks out there that have seen some crazy model solutions over the last several days, but remember, stuff that's going out beyond 10 days really is kind of out in la-la land, and you want to tend to look back and forth between the computer model runs because there's been a lot of different solutions. One day you might have a full-blown hurricane somewhere near Florida, and then the very next run there's nothing. And then the next run there might be a full-blown hurricane hitting New England. And that's kind of what we've been seeing over the past several days. So as things get closer and closer within range, particularly as we're within 7 days, then you got a much better handle, and the models have a much better handle on tropical weather. So let's start out with this little thing that's out here off the East Coast. A little bit of a low pressure area maybe trying to develop there. You got a frontal boundary back here, and there's a lot of moisture associated with it. Models here are pretty robust in developing something, so we'll go ahead and just work with the Euro first of all and look at the East Coast. So this is where we are right now. And as we go through time, you can see that kind of starts to wind up. So as we get into, let's say, the weekend, you're starting to see a little more of a low pressure area develop and then kind of pull back out to sea. That could possibly, with this scenario, could possibly affect areas of eastern Canada. Let's real quick take the GFS. I'll go ahead and roll it back here. So the GFS forms a low maybe a little bit sooner, but it does kind of take the same path. But then then watch what happens. It kind of lifts up there toward Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. So again, some possibilities according to the GFS that maybe we'll get a new tropical system, and if it beats anything that's out in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean, it would get the name Erin. So we'll go back to the Canadian model, and again, pretty similar, maybe a little bit of a low pressure area developing there as we get into the weekend, but not as conclusive as what we're seeing on the other two models. And we'll go ahead and finish with the icon here real quick. And don't worry, we're going to look at the Atlantic too. I just want to kind of focus on this wave that might have a chance for some development off the Carolina coast. The icon model is pretty similar to what we're seeing with the GFS and the Euro. So I think the National Hurricane Center has a pretty good bet on that this will develop into a tropical system eventually. And right now it looks like the major impacts to the U.S. coast is going to be some rough seas and also some coastal erosion. But right now it looks like if it kind of takes that track off toward the east-northeast, hopefully it will bypass Bermuda. So outside of that, Central America really not having any issues this time around. And it has been kind of a weird season because a lot of times you start to get some stronger tropical waves to move into parts of the Caribbean, but the wind shear has been a little bit too high. And there's been a lot of Saharan dust too, but that's good. That's a good thing to keep any tropical systems out of the Caribbean, because when they cross the Caribbean, once they start to work past Jamaica, most of the time they tend to curve northwestward, and then it starts to become more of a Gulf threat. And of course, some of that heat content that's in the waters there west of Jamaica and south of Cuba and east of the Yucatan are sky high. So the last thing we want is any tropical weather to be moving in this particular area here, because not only is it a threat to the Gulf, which of course is a threat to us, but this is also an area where that heat content is so high and those water temperatures are extreme. So if something were to work over there and it had the right atmospheric conditions, you can get something pretty strong in a short period of time. Out in the Atlantic, though, we do have a number of tropical waves. Of course, this one right here we're watching right now. That's part of the one that we're looking at with the National Hurricane Center that might take a trip more like this and pull out into the mid part of the Atlantic Ocean. But there's another tropical wave right here that's forecast to kind of roll behind it. At this point, it might have a little better chance of maybe sliding its way over toward the Caribbean. But then there's another area of rain and low pressure that's going to eventually push off the African coast maybe in a few days. And some of the models there are even more robust with that particular wave as it moves into the Atlantic Ocean. And there's kind of what I'm talking about. You've got the one that's circled in orange there. That's the one that's got a medium chance for development according to the National Hurricane Center. And then you've got another area of low pressure that's kind of there off the African coast. In fact, that one looks like it could possibly become something even stronger as we go through time. But that all again is speculative when it comes to the models. I also wanted to bring up this particular graphic here. And what it does is it shows us really how much extra time that we have to get ready for tropical systems. So you see that if something were to develop out here over the Gulf waters, we're talking about maybe about 1 to 3 days of advanced preparation time. But then when you start to get way out here where some of these tropical waves are, you're talking 14 to 16 days out. So over 2 weeks to be able to prepare for anything that would be forming there. And really, when we're talking about these long range models, anything that's forecasting tropical development 14 to 16 days out, kind of take that with a grain of salt, and then just kind of continue to watch the different models and also follow along the consistency from model run to model run. And usually within about 7 to 10 days, you got a much better handle on if you're going to have something or if you're not. So let's go ahead and work on some of the different models here. When it comes to the let's start with the Euro model. No, this is the icon that we've got up here, and I'm trying to see why we've got. That's the one I want to look at right there. Okay, so we're looking at the Euro model here, and of course we've got I believe that would be Dexter, that's out here in the middle part of the Atlantic. Let me get the right tool here so I'm showing you what I'm talking about here instead of just waving a mouse around on my end. But this right here is going to be Dexter, and this right here would be that other low pressure area that maybe has a little chance for some development here over the next few days. Let's advance this into Saturday. Let's go ahead and move it a little bit farther there. And you see that that low kind of loses some of that low pressure area there. It doesn't look quite as significant as it moves off toward the west, but eventually it kind of makes a comeback, and you see that little low. And what's weird about the Euro model is it might get caught up in whatever else is kind of dancing off of the East Coast. So this is a little bit different of a solution than what we saw with the GFS, but even kind of taking it into a little Fujiwara spin there, maybe over the Canadian Maritimes. And if you're not familiar with the Fujiwara effect, I do have a link in the description below, and that will tell you, it'll explain what happens when you get the Fujiwara effect. And yes, Moderate Motley, this is live. This is definitely live. So let's go ahead and move in here to the GFS. And let me roll it back here to today. And again, you see Dexter out there southeast of Canada, and you see a little bit of a low pressure area moving across the Atlantic. Let's go ahead and follow that low over the Atlantic. It rounds the bottom of a high pressure area. You see the next little system there off the Carolina coast, while at the same time it appears that this other system that's out over the middle part of the Atlantic tends to lose a little bit of steam here. But as we go a little bit farther in, you see it gets a little bit of a chance for some redevelopment, and then hopefully we'll curve around that low pressure area. But if you also notice, there's another low that the GFS is forecasting to take a little bit more of a southerly route. Now, this was actually even farther to the south yesterday, but remember, we're going all the way out here to almost August the 20th. So once we get beyond 10 days, that's where things get a little bit more speculative. So there's 10 days out from where we are right now. And it does at least have something threatening maybe the Caribbean or the northern Caribbean islands. So that's something that we'll just kind of keep an eye on. Again, it's not a worry right now, but it is something that we'll be watching over the next several days. Canadian model, let me go ahead and roll this back. This one only goes out 10 days, so it doesn't go quite as far out as the Euro and the GFS, but it's very similar. You see a little low there. That's the initial low, and then it kind of falls apart, and then maybe becomes something farther down the road. But what's a little different about the Canadian is you don't have a whole lot of significant stuff that's out in the mid part of the Atlantic once you get in here past about the 10-day period. So again, this is going all the way out 10 days. And remember, compared to what we saw with the GFS, see how it had another system coming in? The Canadian model just really doesn't have anything down there. So again, you can't completely rule out something coming toward the northern part of the Caribbean, but since the Euro doesn't have anything and the Icon does, or the Canadian model really doesn't have anything, now we move on to the next model. And again, this Icon only goes out 7 days, so you got your two systems. You got Dexter, and you got that low out over the middle of the Atlantic, and then you get that little bit of formation off the Carolina coastline. But in the tracks, or rather in the wake of those systems, it looks like maybe it's going to try to do a Fujiwara, kind of like what the GFS was showing, or the Euro was showing earlier. But you do see a little bit of a low going out 7 days out in the middle part of the Atlantic. So pretty inconclusive when it comes to anything that would be beyond 10 days. So I wouldn't be real concerned about the waves that are coming off the African coast right now, but it is something you probably should pay attention to, because things are going to be getting more active over the next several weeks. Now, the water temperatures are quite high. And again, we're talking about those water temperatures over the Gulf and the western part of the Caribbean. Again, this is not the area that we want anything to come toward, because that's where we have the potential of seeing rapid intensification if a storm were to work its way through that area. And it's also one of the more dangerous areas when it comes to our location, because things that tend to come up through the Yucatan Channel, if they work into the Gulf, we're kind of in the crosshairs there. So again, something we don't want to happen across the western part of the Caribbean and the southern portion of the Gulf waters. One other thing I wanted to bring up here is the Colorado State University forecast, which they issue a preseason forecast, so does NOAA. Both of them were calling for an above-average season. Colorado State went with 17 to start, and then they've dropped it to 16, and today's outlook holds it at 16. There's a couple of things that they're looking at, and I do have the link in the description below of the summary of the CSU forecast, a little easier to understand, but the link is down there below if you want to check that out later on to see what they're kind of talking about. And one of them is a little bit of the uncertainty of the forecast because these water temperatures that are out here off the coast of Africa are still just slightly below normal. So they're a little bit cooler than average. So that might mean a little less activity starting there, but that doesn't mean that other things won't be able to develop in the Gulf or down here in the Caribbean as well. Another thing that they were looking at was some of the low-level winds moving across portions of the Caribbean here were a little bit lighter than average during the months of June and July, and sometimes that predicts an average or slightly above average number of tropical systems that could potentially come starting in August and going through the end of November. And then they've also got some upper level concerns with some stronger winds that have been over the mid part of the latitudes, the mid latitudes, more of the westerlies, that could tend to shear some things apart across the East Coast if something wants to develop there. But I wasn't surprised to see their numbers unchanged, but they did remark in the actual briefing that the uncertainty in the forecast is a little bit higher. You might hear that with some meteorologists where we talk about a forecast based on all the models that we have, but because maybe the models just aren't agreeing very well, the confidence in your forecast starts to drop off a little bit. When you got everything lining up perfectly, your forecast is, you're pretty confident in your forecast. Doesn't mean it's going to screw up sometime anyway, but you do have a lot more confidence in your forecast. But that's one of the things that they were talking about, the possibility of maybe a miss, especially when it comes to those colder waters that are out there over the mid part of the Atlantic. So if you want to check that out, I did put the link below in the description. You can look at that at your leisure. So right now we don't have anything to worry about. We have nothing that's coming toward the Gulf, just a little extra tropical moisture that's going to roll out of the Bahamas and work west over the next few days. That's probably just going to enhance our rain chances here locally, but at this point, we're not expecting any tropical development. I would expect a new named storm either off the east coast of the U.S. or perhaps out in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean within the next week. And within the next 2 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of more named storms working off the African coast and starting to move off toward the west. Of course, we'll watch the direction of movement. Just remember when you're looking at some of the social media sites and you see a big full-blown hurricane right over south central Louisiana, make sure you check the time of that post or even the date of that post, because I've seen a few of them that popped up in my feed that were actually about 3 days old already. So we already know the forecast has changed significantly since those runs. So really be smart on social media. Make sure you're getting it from a trusted source, and most importantly, just check the date and the time of when that post is, because more than likely it would be an older post that wouldn't even matter anymore. So again, be smart on social media with what you view and what you share. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. And don't forget, you can hear me on these great local radio stations: Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And you can also follow my social media pages. That's where I put the updates on Dexter, or if anything new were to fire up. And then, of course, thanks to everyone who's subscribed to Acadiana Weather Today right here on YouTube. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you on Thursday for Acadiana Weather Today at 7 o'clock right here on YouTube.